I still remember the sound of the rain that night. Steady, patient, like the world was trying to calm something restless inside me. I didn't think the evening would matter. It was just supposed to be a quick visit to my best friend's place. But life has a strange way of handing you moments that change how you see people and yourself. My name is Daniel. I grew up in a small town outside Portland, Oregon. My best friend since forever has been Chris Parker, the kind of friend who knows your worst jokes and still laughs at them. We survived high school, bad haircuts, and heartbreaks together. And all those years, there was one constant figure in the background of our lives. His mother, Melissa Parker. Melissa wasn't loud or flashy. She had this soft way of speaking, like every word had been weighed before it landed. She worked at the local library, always surrounded by stories that weren't hers. There was something about her, a quiet kindness, mixed with a sadness she never spoke about. When I was younger, I didn't understand it. When I grew older, I started to see it a little clearer. That evening, Chris had texted me to come over. Game night. Pizza. Same as always. But by the time I pulled into the driveway, the rain had already turned heavy, the kind that blurs everything beyond the windshield. A few seconds later, another message buzzed on my phone. Running late. Mom's home. She'll let you in. I hesitated, just for a moment, not because I didn't want to see her, but because lately, whenever I did, I noticed more. The tiredness in her eyes. The way she tried to fill the silence with warmth she didn't always seem to feel herself. Before I could knock twice, the door opened. Melissa stood there, cardigan wrapped loosely around her, hair gathered back like she hadn't had the energy to do much more. Daniel, she said, smiling in that gentle way of Hayes. Come in. You're soaked. I laughed it off, stepping inside as thunder rolled in the distance. Chris did text you, right? She asked. He said he might be late. Yeah. I figured I'd still drop by. I replied. She nodded, then headed toward the kitchen. Tea? She asked. You always like honey instead of sugar. I paused. You remembered that. She smiled softly. Mothers remember small things, even for boys who aren't ours. We sat at the kitchen table, rain whispering against the windows. We talked about work, about how fast life moves when you're not looking, about everything and nothing. But there was something different beneath it all. Her eyes lingered a little longer. Her voice softened when she said my name. I felt it, and I knew she did too, a quiet recognition of two people who had cared more than they ever said. An hour passed, then another. Chris stopped answering his phone. I stood up, trying to be polite. Maybe I should head out. You probably want to rest. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked toward the dark window, listening to the rain like it was saying something only she could hear. When she finally spoke, her voice wasn't steady. Would you stay a little longer? She asked. It's been a long time since the house didn't feel empty. The words weren't dramatic. They weren't romantic. They were simply honest, a window into the loneliness she kept locked behind her smile. So I stayed. We didn't rush into conversation. We just listened to the storm for a while. Then, quietly, she started talking. About her husband who had passed years ago. About how she poured herself into being a mother and somehow forgot who she was outside of that role. About how the house felt different now that Chris was mostly gone, chasing his own life. I don't think people realize, she said softly, how loud silence can be when nobody needs you anymore. Her voice trembled, and before I could think about it, I reached for her hand, not out of impulse, but because she looked like someone who had been brave for too long. She looked up at me then, really looked, and for a moment, the world just quieted, not because something dramatic was happening, but because two people felt seen. It's just us right now, she whispered, not as an invitation, not as a test, just a truth spoken aloud. I should have left. Maybe I would have, if the moment had been about desire alone. But it wasn't. It was about two lonely hearts brushing against each other in the wrong chapter of life. So I stayed a little longer. We talked until the storm eased. She told me things she had never said to anyone. How grief doesn't end. It just gets quieter. How people assume you're fine once enough time passes. How sometimes you wondered if she'd become invisible. I never crossed a line that night, And neither did she, at least not the kind you read about in gossip. Instead, we crossed an emotional one, the kind that teaches you how thin the wall can be between comfort and complication. At one point, she laughed through tears and said, "Thank you for listening, for treating me like a person, not just somebody's mom." When Chris finally got home, much later than planned, the lights were dim and the house was calm. I said goodnight and left before he even walked through the front door. The next few days were different. We didn't call. We didn't text. But the silence had weight. It held all the unsaid things between us. Then, about a week later, I saw her at the grocery store. We didn't talk long. We didn't need to. There was a small, understanding smile. A silent agreement. We would protect the moment by letting it stay in the past. Months passed. Life moved. I moved across the state for work, built a new routine, met new people. But sometimes, late at night, when rain touched the windows, I'd remember that evening. Not with regret, not with longing, but with a kind of gentle respect. Because not every connection is meant to become a story people talk about. Some are meant to soften you, to show you the fragile ways people hurt, how deeply they want to be seen. Years later, when Chris got married, I flew back home. At the reception, I saw her across the room. Time had traced new lines across her face, but her eyes were the same, warm, thoughtful, carrying unspoken chapters. She approached me with a glass of champagne and that familiar soft smile. "You've grown into yourself," she said. "So have you," I replied. We stood there for a moment, surrounded by music and laughter that didn't belong to us. Then she touched my arm lightly, a simple gesture, full of meaning. "What happened that night," she said gently, "wasn't wrong. It was human, and I hope you found people who make you feel known." I swallowed, emotions tightened in my throat. "I have," I said, "and I never forgot your kindness." She smiled, that same small, knowing smile, and then blended back into the celebration. And as I watched her disappear into the crowd, I understood something I hadn't before. Some people aren't meant to stay. They arrive to awaken empathy inside you, to remind you that beneath the routines, the polite greetings, the practiced smiles, there are hearts carrying storms no one else hears. And sometimes, the most powerful love isn't the one that turns into forever. Sometimes it's the one that teaches you to see people more gently, even if it only exists for a little while. Thank you for watching Classic Stories. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that remind us how powerful compassion truly is.